So we'll start here with Pickle. So I'm going to open up a new file, and I'm going to just save this really quick. And we're going to create a new directory where we've been working in. So here's our Python socket examples. And I'll right click and just create a new folder, file, new folder, and I'll call it for advanced GUI chat room. We'll put it in here. And I'm going to save this file as, we'll save it as pickle underscore client.py, and then we'll make another file and we'll save it as, in that same location, pickle underscore server.py. All right, perfect. So now we've got our two files here. And so let's start by importing the socket and pickle modules at the start of each file. So those are some things that we're definitely just going to need. So I'll come over here to my client and I'll just put pickle client import socket and pickle. And then over here, we'll do pickle server, and we'll import socket and pickle. Okay, wonderful. So now Pickle allows us to send and receive Python objects through our socket. So we don't just have to send strings, we can now send things like lists or dictionaries. And really all we've sent so far is just simple text, a string. Pickling will essentially serialize any Python object, such as a list or dictionary, into a bytes object for us so that we can send it through the socket's data stream. However, it's important to note that Pickle has some known insecurities, which we will eventually discuss. So I'm just going to preface this by saying use at your own risk. And so you may be asking yourself, well, why am I showing it to you then? And I guess in short, the answer is it's super easy. So it's really easy to just pickle something. And a lot of people seem to use it. So I figured if you were trying to look something up on your own, you might run into Pickle. So I thought it was worth introducing here. So let's start with our server file. So we got our server file right here. And let's start by just creating a list. And I don't know, we'll call it unpickled list. And it'll hold like 3 types of pickles. Why not? So let's just say, let's create a regular old list. So we'll say unpickled list is equal to, and in here we'll just put some pickle names. Dill. We'll put bread and butter, and then we'll put half sour. All right, so there's three types of pickles for our list. Okay, so now we have that. So let's print the list. So we'll just say print unpickled list, and we'll print the type that we have here. So we'll call the type function, and we'll pass in unpickled list. So if we run this, exactly what we expect it to be, we'll see the list. All right, so there's our list, and we're getting an object as a list, so we get the expected results. Perfect. So now let's see what happens if we try to encode this list with our typical, dot encode method that we have been using, up to this point in these videos. So we'll say try to encode the list using dot encode. All right, so we'll say, I don't know, I'll call this trial list is equal to unpickled list dot encode, and we'll pass in UTF-8 as our encoder. And so now let's see, can we print trial list, and can we print the type of trial list? So let's see what happens. All right, and if we look, it looks as if we get an error. It does not work. And so it says here, a list object has no attribute encode. And this is because encode is a string method, and there is not a simple encoding process for non-string objects, such as like a list or a dictionary. So let's try to now encode this list into a bytes object using Pickle. So I'm just going to comment these lines out. We'll comment those out because we know they won't work, and I'll just say doesn't work. All right, so there we go. So that's for our own little reference right there. And so now we'll say, now let's encode by pickling the list. All right, so let's pickle it. So to encode with Pickle, what we have to use, it's not called the encode method, it's actually called the dumps method. So we'll call our list the pickled list, I guess, and we'll say we'll call the pickle module, and then we'll say pickle.dumps. And now what do we want to essentially encode? We want to encode our unpickled list. All right, perfect. So now this is a method that we can use to encode this list. We'll call pickle.dumps. We'll use the .dump method to encode this list. And so now this should be an encoded bytes object. So let's print pickled list, and let's print the type function of pickled list. And let's see what we get here. So if we run this, is this going to be a bytes object? And so in fact, if we look, there is our encoded list, right? So there we are. We printed pickled list, which was encoded. And if we look, what type of object do we have here? We now have a bytes object. And that's perfect because we can send this bytes object through our data stream with sockets. Awesome. So let's actually give this a shot here. Let's create a server-side socket now that we can use to send our list. So inside of here in my server, we're just going to say create a server socket. All right, so we'll say server socket is equal to socket.socket. And in here, I'll pass socket.afinet for IPv4 and socket.sock_stream for TCP. All right, then we'll bind it. So we'll say server_socket.bind. And I have to bind it to my specific IP and port address. I'm just going to roughly do it here. So I'll do socket.getHost by name. And then in here, socket.getHostName. All right, so there's going to be our IP address. I know before we were pulling these out of the, and setting them as constant variables. I'm not going to do it here just for time. So there's our port 12345. And now that we have bound the socket at this location, let's set it to listen. So we'll say server socket.listen. Okay, wonderful. And so that's perfect. So now what do we want to do? Well, really quickly, we'll just say listen forever to accept any connection. So we'll say while true. All right, and we're going to accept any incoming connection, and we'll store that connection in we get two pieces of information. We'll get a client socket, and we'll get a client address, and we'll just say server socket.accept. So we'll call the accept method on the server socket and get the two pieces of information that it passes, and then we'll just print out some information here. I'll use an F string. It says connected to, and then we'll put in client underscore address. Okay, so that's going to just give us a little bit of verification there. Now, what do we want to do? As soon as someone connects to us, we've got this nice pickled list that we weren't really sure how we were going to send, but using pickle, oh, that's not a pickled list. Here it is. This nice pickled list. So it's a bytes object. So we've serialized our list. Let's send it. So we'll say send the encoded pickled list. All right, so we'll say client socket.send pickled list. And if you notice here, I don't have to call .encode or anything like this because it's already encoded. And we'll just say this is already encoded, right? We encoded it with pickle essentially. And then once we send it, let's just close the socket. So close the socket. We're not really going to open up a line for communication. So we'll say server socket.close. All right, and so I think that's going to be our server. So I'll just save it really quick, and then let's just head over to our we'll head over to our client. So now on our client side, what do we got to do? So on our client script, let's first create our client socket and connect it to our server. So we'll say create a client socket. So we'll say client socket client socket is equal to socket.socket, and we'll say AF underscore inet, and we'll say socket.af underscore inet, and socket.sockstream. Okay, perfect. So there is going to be our socket, and now we'll connect client socket.connect. And where are we going to connect? It's a tuple. We'll connect to our IP, so socket.getHost by name. And in here we'll pass socket.getHostName. And then we'll connect to port 12345. So nothing too bad right here. So once we connect, we know that the server is going to send us, right, a pickled list. So as soon as we connect, the server is going to try to send us that pickled list. So let's receive the list. All right, so we'll say receive the pickled list from the server. So we'll say pickled list is equal to client socket.receive, and here we'll pass in just an arbitrary byte size of 1024. And so when we do this now, let's see, let's print the pickled list, and let's print the type of the pickled list. So let's run this now, and let's see what happens here. Okay, so let's check it out. So here's my server. Oh, I think I got a mistake. Yeah, accept. This should be accept. There we go. All right, so that looks like it's running. We'll run this over here, and let's see what happens to our client. Okay, so it says right here, oh, I forgot. Silly me. I forgot on my line 6 here on my client for socket.getHostname, I need parentheses right here. So I forgot that right there. Sorry about that. So let's try running this again. Will it work, or will we have to reload the server? Let's see. Okay, so perfect. So it looks like we have the encoded list that came, and as it comes in, so we got it right here, it is still a bytes object. Perfect. So we have to decode this using what? How are we going to decode this list? Well, we can't just call the .decode method, and we saw that. And we'll even say, like, cannot. We'll just say you cannot decode using .decode, right? Just like on our server over here, we said we can't encode using .encode. It won't work. So you can't decode a list using .decode. It's not part of it's not a list method. So what are we going to use? We'll use Pickle. We'll use Pickle. All right, so let's decode this using Pickle. So we'll call it the unpickled list is equal to, now to encode, we used pickle.dumps. To decode, we will use pickle.loads. All right, and so we'll put in here our pickled list. All right, and so that should essentially, it's going to like unpickle the list. It will decode the list, and so now if we print unpickled list, and we print the type of unpickled list, we should see what we get. Hopefully we'll get this to work out. So let's run the server again. All right, and now I'll run my client, and you can see, all right, here was the thing that we received, right, from our server, the bytes object. It was the encoded list, and then here, using the pickle.loads, we were able to decode that, and we have a list again. And so if you look, this is great. So we have a list, and of course we have all of the functionality that is associated with a given list. So like I can, say for our new list, we have all the list methods. So we can do something like print unpickled list at index 0, so we have indexing. We should be able to add to it, so we can say unpickled list.append, and we'll add gherkin. I think that's a pickle, and we can loop through it. So we'll say for pickle. We'll say for pick in unpickled list. We can say print pickle or print pick, we'll say. So all that should work, and then I guess we might as well close the socket. So we'll say client socket.close. So we are in fact getting a list object here. So let's just verify that all of those list methods are working. So I run the server, I'll run the client, and yeah, all of that's working. So we printed out our first index of dill. All right, dill, then we loop through the list, dill, bread and butter, half sour, and we had appended gherkin. So it looks like this is working out, really quite nicely. So, pickle seems pretty easy. You just do, pickle.dumps to encode, and then pickle.loads to decode. So awesome. It's great. It's easy. And you can serialize any Python object, whether it's a list, a dictionary, even a function, or a class. However, there are a lot of warnings about using Pickle. In particular, the way the Pickle module operates, I guess it's possible to construct like malicious Pickle data, which will then execute arbitrary code during the unpickling process. And so this is like a well-known thing. It's known as a Pickle bomb. And so, I mean, I'm going to open up the documentation for Pickle. Here is the official Python documentation, and this is taken right from here. It says, warning, the Pickle module is not secure, only unpickled data that you trust. And so, it says that there's malicious Pickle data which could execute arbitrary of JSON. So I'm going to open up 2 new files here, and I will save them in that same directory that we were in before, Advanced GUI Chat Room. I'll call this first one JSON client.py. And then I'll open up another file, and we'll save this as JSON server.py. Okay, perfect. So right at the top, we will start by importing our socket and JSON modules. So we'll do that for both of these files. So I'll say client side JSON. So we'll say import socket and JSON. Okay, and then let's head over to the server. So we'll say server. As a comment, server side JSON, import socket, and the JSON module. All right, wonderful. So now JSON will allow us to send and receive Python objects through sockets by turning any Python object, like a list or a dictionary, into a string, which we can then encode. So unlike Pickle, we just encoded something straight away, right? I had a list, and we used pickle.dumps and pickle.load to encode and decode the list directly. With JSON, what we'll do is we'll take an object, maybe like a dictionary, we'll use JSON to turn it into a string, and then we'll call the .encode method on the string, and then we can take that string and decode it, and then use JSON to turn it back into a dictionary. And JSON here has no known, I think, vulnerabilities, or at least any that I have found online. So let's head to the server file here, and let's create a dictionary. So we'll say create a dict to represent, I don't know, maybe a message packet holding all message information. I don't know. So we're just kind of like thinking about what this might look like in application to our chat room. So here we'll say message packet is equal to, so we'll have a dictionary, and we'll put a couple of keys. We'll have a key flag with an associated value, maybe message. All right. We'll have a key name with an associated value. I'll put my name, Mike. We'll have a key message with an associated value. This is my message coming through. And we'll have maybe, what just happened there? And then maybe we'll have a key, we'll say color, with an associated value. Maybe it's a hex value, 00FF, I don't know, 3F. All right, so there is our message packet that we maybe want to send. So before, if you think about it, right, our messages have been just basic strings, but now we're going to try to pass lots of information about this message in our message packet. So we've got the dictionary that's going to work really great here. And so now we got to try to send, what did I do? I put that in quotations. I didn't mean to do that. So now we need to try to figure out how are we going to send this dictionary object through our data stream via sockets. Okay, so let's start by just taking a look at our original dictionary. So we'll say, let's look at the original dictionary. So we'll say print message packet, and we'll say print, we'll call the type function. I always like to know what we're working with. Message packet. So if we run this, I don't think there should be any surprises here. So we have, there is our dictionary, and you can see the class. This is definitely a dictionary object. Okay, perfect. So, we'll say you can't encode a dict with .encode. It won't work. So, we could try it, but it's not going to work. We'll print message packet .encode, and we'll pass in UTF 8 here. It's not going to work. It won't work because See, it says a dictionary object has no attribute in code. Okay, so everything that we're saying right now, hopefully, is making sense. We know we can't encode a dictionary. So what we have to do is we have to use JSON, the JSON module, to turn our dictionaries into string objects. So let's try that right now. So we'll come down here and we'll say turn the dict into a string using JSON. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've got our message packet. So let's create a message JSON object, we'll call it. And so I'm going to call the JSON module, and I'll call json.dumps. And what am I going to use here? I'm going to plug in my message packet. So this is going to take that object, which is a dictionary, and it's going to turn it, hopefully, into a string. So now if I print message JSON, and then I print the type function of message JSON, what we should see is the string representation of that dictionary. All right, perfect. So if you look here, the dictionary itself and the string, they kind of look similar, except now this is the key here, right? Instead of working with a dictionary, we actually have a string object. And so that's really going to help us because now that we have a string, we can now encode our string to get a bytes object. So let's talk about doing that right now. So lastly here, we'll just say now we can encode the string representation of the dict. So we'll say, I don't know, print message JSON.encode. And we'll pass in UTF-8 here. We'll print it, and then let's also just print the type here. Let's just make sure we have a bytes object if we do this. So print, we'll call the type function message JSON.encode, and then UTF-8. All right, so let's just verify that we do in fact have a bytes object here right at the end. And here it is. So there's our encoded string as a bytes object, and we have that bytes object ready for us. So now we can use that to send it through the data stream via a socket. So let's practice this. Let's verify that this works. Let's actually create our socket here. So we'll come down here and we'll create a server-side socket. So create a server socket. We'll do server socket is equal to socket.socket, and in here we'll call socket.af_inet and socket.sockstream to give us the correct protocols. We'll bind it, so we'll say server socket.bind, and we'll be kind of quick here. We'll just say socket.getHost by name, and inside of here we'll pass socket.getHost name, and I'll remember my parentheses, and that's going to be our local IP address, and then let's just specify our port 12345. The socket's created, it's been bound to a location, so now we'll say server socket.listen. All right, wonderful. And so now that that server socket is created, let's just make a quick while loop that listens for incoming connections. So we'll say listen for all incoming connections. And so we'll just say while true, we'll say client socket. We're going to get a client socket and a client address. We're going to get those two pieces of information anytime our server socket accepts an incoming connection. So, right, we know that that returns two pieces of information. We'll just print a little thing to the screen here saying connected to, and we'll use an F string and pass in client address. All right. So that looks pretty good. And so now, once we've connected successfully, let's send the JSON object over. Okay, so we'll say send the JSON object, which, I mean, I'm calling it a JSON object. It's just a string, right? Which is just a string. It's not a special thing. But we should mention, but we have to encode this first, right? We didn't actually encode the message. We were just like printing it as encoded. So we actually have to do the encoding here before we send it. So we'll say client socket.send, and we'll send message JSON.encode, and we'll pass in our UTF-8 as our encoder. Okay, so I think that's gonna work pretty good, and once we send it, we'll just simply close the socket. So we'll say server socket.close, and then we'll break the while loop. Okay, so that's going to be our server. Hopefully there's no issues in there. So why don't we now just head over to our let's head over to our client script and let's see what we're going to do to handle this. So on our client side, we'll make a client socket. So we'll say create a client socket, and I'll do client socket is equal to socket.socket, and in here we'll pass socket.af_inet and socket.sock_stream. Wonderful. And now we'll connect. So we'll say client socket.connect, and where are we connecting to? It's going to be our local IP. So we'll do socket.get host by name, and in here we'll pass socket.get host name. And then the port we were using is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so now once this client socket connects to the server, right, and we accept the connection, I spelled accept wrong here, accept, there we go. We know that the server is going to be sending over a string, the JSON string, right? So we got to grab it. So let's receive the JSON object, which is just a string. I like to call it the JSON object just to keep it straight in my head, from the server. So we're going to say message JSON is equal to client socket.receive. We're going to receive it with, we'll just pick an arbitrary byte size 1024. And so now I think maybe we have to see, like, do we have to decode it here? So let's draw attention to this. We'll say we received it from the server, receive the encoded JSON object, which is just a string from the server, and then we'll just say, do we have to decode here? So let's see what's going to happen. So if I type print message JSON, and then I print the type of message JSON, let's see what happens. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'll run the server. All right, so here's my server, and now I'll run my client. And it looks like we have we are getting a bytes object. So we do have to decode it. Okay, perfect. So let's go back and let's decode this now. Okay, so if we come over here, let's just add a little line where we'll put .decode, and we'll use UTF-8 here. So now let's check it and let's run this. So there's our server. We're running the server. Now we'll run our client. And hopefully now what we'll be printing is a string. Perfect. So the bytes object is gone. So now we have our string that we need. Of course, we don't really want a string. We want this to be a dictionary, because right now if it's a string, we can't use any of the dictionary methods on it. So let's turn it back into, so we'll say turn the string object back into a dict using JSON. So we'll call this message packet is equal to JSON, and then we'll call the .loads method here to turn it back into a dictionary. So we'll pass in message JSON. So now if I print message packet and I print the type of message packet, what we should see here is we should see that this is in fact a dictionary. So let's just run this and verify. All right. And so you can see right here now, using JSON.loads, we have taken the string representation and we have put it back into a dictionary. So this is great. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. So we can actually turn a bytes object back into a dictionary in one step using the loads method. So like right here, if you look, essentially what we're doing is we're bringing in the bytes object, we're decoding it to a string, and then we're turning the string back into the dictionary, right? I think you remember seeing that. So watch what happens now if I get rid of the decode method. We actually don't have to decode our bytes objects here. The loads method will take the bytes object and turn it into the string for us, and then it will allow us to turn it back into the dictionary. So if we run this now, this should still work perfectly fine. And it does. So you can see here, instead of the string, we have the bytes object, and JSON.loads is doing exactly what we want to. It's bringing us to a dictionary. So the loads method, can deserialize a byte object containing a JSON object to its corresponding, Python object. You can see we have a dictionary. So it works kind of nice. So if we change our message packet to that of a list when we send it, after using the loads method, what we would get is a list. If it's a dictionary, we get a dictionary. Perfect. So we don't actually have to call .decode when receiving the message through the data stream here. There's nothing wrong with decoding it, maybe just to remember the process, I suppose. So maybe I'll put a little note here. We can decode, but we don't have to with JSON. And so we might be able to say message, I'll put that on its own line. Message JSON is equal to client socket.receive 1024.decode UTF-8. So we don't have to do that, but you might like to, just for peace of mind. Okay, so now we have a dictionary. We sent a dictionary through our data stream, so we should have all of the functionality that is associated with a dictionary. So I should be able to do things like our new object is in fact a dictionary. So we should be able to say print like message packet, and then I should be able to access like one of the keys, so maybe like message, to get that value, and I should be able to loop through here, so I can say something like for key comma value in message packet dot items. We'll call the dot items method on the dictionary. I should be able to print, and we'll use an F string here, the key colon, and we'll send the value. So, and I'll just close my socket, close the socket. So I'll say client socket.close. So let's just verify that everything's working the way that we expect it to. We run our server, right? So we ran the server, we started with the dictionary, we used JSON to turn it into a string, and then we encoded the string as a bytes object using the .encode method. Then we sent it through the data stream. On the opposite side here, on the client, we received it, and we just kept it as a bytes object, and then we used the loads method to essentially deserialize the bytes object, and it gave us back a dictionary. And you can see we have all the functionality of a dictionary. So there I am accessing certain elements, and there I am looping through the dictionary. All right, perfect. So we've now seen a few different methods for sending objects through our data stream using sockets. This is going to help us as we try to create a more robust server for our chat application that can kind of be used as an admin or administrative role. And we'll start that whole project in our next video. So I look forward to seeing you then. So our client GUI is really not going to change much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste it from our last program. So I'm going to come over here and open up, where is it? We got desktop, Python socket examples. And so we'll go back into our basic GUI chat room, and I'm just going to open up this client script that we had. And now I'm going to save it as a new file. So I'll do save as, and I will make sure to put it in the advanced GUI chat room here. So I'll just call this our client file. And here it's already a Python, so I don't need the .py extension. Okay, and then what we'll also do is really quick, let's grab the icon that we were using. So I'm going to come over here and just copy my message icon. Is it copy, and we'll come over here and we'll paste that in so that we have that icon available for us to use as well. Okay, perfect. So now let's open this back up. All right. Now here, our GUI isn't really going to change much. So right, if I run this, we're familiar with what this GUI looks like. Here it is. But we are going to make some changes to this, the GUI itself. In particular, What I want to do is I want to have some distinction between clients as they are connected to the server. And one way we can do that is to allow the client to pick a color that they want their text to appear. And so what we'll do is we're going to create a row of radio buttons right here where the user can select what color they want that text to appear. So let's start editing this GUI in our new client file right here. So we're going to start by adding some more predefined colors. So we have our defined fonts and colors here, and let's add a whole list of more. So I've got black and light green, and these are the colors that will allow the users to choose from. So we'll do white, which is going to be in hexadecimal FF, FF, FF. We'll do a red, a specific red, FF. I'll do 3855 here, and you can just pick whatever colors you want to use. Orange, I will use FFAA1D. We'll do a yellow, and I'll specify that as FFF700. We'll do a green, and we'll use here, I'll do 1FC742. We'll do a blue, and this color I'll use, let's do 5DADEC. And then for purple, I will use 9C51B6. Now, I definitely didn't just like make these values up, okay? I tested these, and you can go to you can just Google something like color picker, so color picker, and it should give you, there's the we want the hex values. Oh, see, so here's a hex value. So even something like this, you can just move this around and get the hex values from a color picker. There's lots of great resources online where you can do something like that. Okay, so now that we have those extra colors added in, we are going to, let's maybe create our radio buttons, right? So let's put these radio buttons in their own frame so I can format them the way that I specifically want. So if we run this now, right, you might say, okay, well, this is going to be part of the input frame, because they're going to be, or the information frame, whatever we called that. But I don't want to use this layout. I want to just have the whatever 7 buttons that we have all in one row. So I'm going to have 7 individual columns, and that will really mess up this layout that I have here. So we're going to create a brand new frame now. So let's scroll down, and I'm going to scroll down to where we were defining our frames. So right here we were creating our frames. I have my info frame, my output frame, my input frame. My color frame, I will call it, is going to go directly below the info frame. So I'll put it right here. Color frame is equal to tkinter.frame, and we want to place this frame in the root window with a background of black. Awesome. So now that that's there, we have to pack it to the screen, or pack it to the root window. Remember, we're using the pack system for our root window here. And so where do we want it to be placed in the hierarchy of these things? We want it to be right below the info frame. So we're going to put it right here, and we'll say color frame.pack. Perfect. Okay, so this should work out really nicely. Of course, if we run this, we know that we're not going to really see any difference here because that frame has no widgets in it, so it's not being inflated, or it's not taking up the size that it needs to. So why don't we put some radio buttons in there? So we'll create our radio buttons next, and we're going to create a radio button, one for each color, all linked to the same variable, and we'll use a string variable that will change its value from one color to the next based on the choice of the radio button. So to use the string variable, we have to import it from tkinter. So I'm going to come up here to the top, and we'll just say right here, we'll say import string var. All right, so now we're bringing in that functionality. Perfect. So let's go down now and add in these radio buttons. So if I scroll down to my layout section, all right, so here we were creating our frames, creating our info layout. So right here, after we create the info layout, I will say, we'll do color frame layout. So we'll start by declaring a string variable. We'll call it color. is equal to a string var, and so we brought that in, we imported that in, and so right now what we're going to do is let's just set the default value of this color. So we'll say of this variable. So we'll say color.set, and we'll set its value to be white. All right, so it'll be the white color initially right when we start. So now let's create 7 radio buttons using the radio button class, and so we'll add them to the color frame. We're going to hard set a width to 5, and then we'll give like an appropriate text value, for whatever the color is, and then we'll like set the background and foreground colors and apply our font. So I think that should work nice. Let's try to do that right now. So we'll start with a white button. All right, so white button is tkinter.radio button. All right, so it's a radio button. Where are we putting it? We're putting it in the color frame. We are going to hard code a width to be 5. The text here will read white. The variable we want to link this radio button to is our string variable color. The value we want the variable to take when this radio button is selected is the white, which is one of our predefined colors that we defined right up here. All right, perfect. So let's scroll back down just to make sure we're all on the same page there. I'll move this over. A few more things we want. What else do we want to do? Let's set the background color of the button to blend into our frame, which is going to be black. We'll set the text color, the foreground color, to be light green, and then we'll set the font to be my font, which is that predefined font we had defined earlier. Now, we are going to just copy this and paste it for all of our other buttons because a lot of the formatting is going to be the same. So I'll double click and highlight that whole line, hit Control C, and then if we just come over here, I will just begin pasting these. So this one, I'll change this will be our red button. And so what do we want to do? We want to change this to say the word red, and then this is going to take a value of red. I think everything else can stay the same. All right, let's do some more radio buttons. We got a lot more, so we'll do our orange button next. Orange. The text will read orange, and the value will be orange, our variable orange, which is holding that hex value for the orange color. Next, what's next? We got yellow. All right, so we'll change yellow. We'll change yellow. And we will change this value to yellow. All right, we'll do a few more. Green, we'll do a green, a blue, and a purple. So let's do those all. Green, green, and green. Then we'll do blue. So we'll call this the blue button. Blue button. Text is blue. Value is blue. And lastly, we'll have oh my gosh, what's our last color? It's purple, right? Purple. And we'll make this purple. And like I said, choose whatever colors you want. As long as you're just consistent, I think, in your naming conventions, you'll be set. And really, actually, we could just change the text here and then just adjust the values of their variables, and nothing else will really matter. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do here, now that we've got all these radio buttons defined, is I'm going to put all of these radio buttons into a list, and this is going to help us later on when we want to disable or enable all of these radio buttons right at once. So it'll give us a nice list where we can loop through all of our radio buttons. So I'll call this list color buttons. We'll make it a list, and I'll put in white button, red button, orange button, yellow button, green button, blue button, and purple button. All right, so now we have these all in a list. Perfect. So now we want these all to appear in one row, all side by side to one another. So what we'll do, the layout system that we're going to use in this color frame that will allow us to do this is going to be the grid system. So we'll put each button in the same row, and we'll just move them one column to the next, and then we will add some vertical padding and horizontal padding. So we'll say white button dot grid, row equals 1, column equals 0. I'll do horizontal padding of 2 and vertical padding of 2. And now I'm just going to copy this and paste it a bunch of times. So 1, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And we just got to change these names. So red, orange, oops, this is going to be yellow, green, blue, and purple. And we have to adjust the specific columns, right? Because right now they're all being placed in the same spot. So the red button will be column 1, this will be column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5, and column 6. And we can do that because this is in its own frame, so we don't have to worry about this messing with any of our other other layouts. So let's run this and see what it looks like. Okay, it looks pretty good. That looks great. One of the things I might do is I might remove my vertical padding on our input entry because I think adding our row of color buttons has kind of pushed our layout down a bit. You see how this is kind of pushed down. So we'll remove our vertical padding on our on the input entry. So let's go to the input entry. All right, so let's see. Right up here, input entry. Where's our input entry? I just gotta find it. Info frame, input entry. Here it is. So input entry, let's remove this vertical padding right here, and that should push everything back into our window nicely. So we'll get rid of the vertical padding on that, and let's get rid of the vertical padding, I think, on the button, on the send button as well. And so now let's see if that fixes that issue nicely. Okay, that looks better. So now these aren't like pushed off of the window of our screen. All right, so there is our nice layout, and so I can select my different color options, and that's going to allow me to send my messages in different colors. So this is pretty cool. I think the client looks really great. Now, the client this time, if we look, before, what were we doing? Oh, let me close that out. Before, we were simply sending a string. That was all we were sending through our data stream, through our socket, just a string. This time, however, we're going to be sending a message packet that's going to hold a lot of information. We'll have it hold a flag describing what type of message is coming in, whether it's a name flag, like a message to be broadcast, or maybe a quit flag. It'll also hold the message in question. It will hold the client's name, and it will hold the client's chosen color. So every time we send a message, it's going to be like this large packet of information, and we'll use a dictionary to send all of this information. And we saw a nice convenient way to send a dictionary, a Python object, through the data stream is using Json. So we'll use Json to turn our dictionary into a string, which we can then encode as a bytes object and send it. Now, this is going to require us to kind of refactor a lot of our functions within our client code here, and we'll get to that eventually, but for now, why don't we just clear out these functions so we are ready to rewrite them in the future. So on the client side, here is my receive message function. I'm just going to delete this. Here's my send message function. I'm going to delete this. Maybe I'll put pass in here. I should write pass. Pass. All right, here is my disconnect. We'll say pass. Here is my verify connection. We'll say pass. Here is my connect function, and we'll just simply say pass. And at this point, I can probably get rid of my global client socket. I don't think we'll be using global variables this time, so I'll also remove that as well. And so now we've got our client sort of set up here to be this more robust chat room application. So I think this is a great place to stop in this video. In our next video, maybe we'll begin looking at what our server side is going to look like in terms of a GUI layout for the chat room. So I'm going to open up a new file, new file, and I will hit Control-S to save it. We're saving it in the advanced GUI chat room location, and I'll save it as server.py. Here I got to put the .py extension because it's viewing this as plain text, so that'll say, hey, this is a Python file. All right, perfect. And so now, why don't we begin? Well, here let me put server side for GUI chat room, and and then I'll just put admin here. And you know what? I'll make a distinction. Client side, we'll say advanced GUI chat room, and I'll save that on the client. And server side we'll just say server side advanced GUI chat room admin. Okay, so now there's just a little distinction from our last code here. We'll start by importing the modules that we know we are going to need here. So we'll import, we know we're going to need tkinter for our GUI. We're going to need socket for our communication over the network. We are going to need threading for having concurrent processes running at the same time, like listening for messages and sending messages. And then we're going to need JSON to help us serialize like our Python objects, our dictionaries that we're going to send through the data stream. Okay, perfect. So those are there. Great. So why don't we now define a window, our root window. We'll give it a title and we'll give it an icon. So we'll say define window, and so we'll call our window the root window, root, and by calling the tkinter module, and we'll call the tk class. Next, let's give it a title. So we'll say root.title. We'll call this chat server. We'll just say chat server instead of chat client. We'll set an icon, root.icon bitmap, and we'll use our message underscore icon.ico. And if you remember, I had pasted that into this directory where this was earlier. So that file is Python examples. Here we go. So there's our message icon.ico file right here in this folder. We'll set the geometry, the size, so root.geometry. We'll keep it the same size as our client, so 600 by 600. And lastly, I don't want it to be resized, so I'll do root.resizable 00. I like to make things not resizable because we're building a specific kind of like a static layout. The layout's not really going to change as the window changes, so we'll make sure that they can't resize things. All right, perfect. Let's now define maybe some like a font and some colors here. So we'll say define fonts and colors that we'll use. So we'll say my font is equal to, we're going to use Simsun, and the font size will be 14. I think that's similar to what we were doing on the client side. And we'll use the same two main colors, so that like just slightly off black, 010101, and we'll do our green, which sort of emulates that old Apple computer, I think, of 1FC742. And then now let's just set the background color of our root window while we're here. So here's our root window. We'll call the .config method, and we'll pass in the background attribute BG, and we'll say black. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. Why don't we just put a couple of comments here? We'll say define functions. We'll put some functions there, and then we'll just say define GUI layout. We'll define our layout right here. And then the last thing that I just need to do at the end here is we'll run the root windows main lop method. All right, so we'll say root.main loop, and that should open the window up for us. So let's run this and let's just verify that the window is up and running and everything looks pretty good. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be our root window for our chat server now. Okay, so if we think about this, let's talk about the different types of frames that we're going to need for our chat server. And if you remember, I like it to do it such that each frame holds dedicated functionality. So we're going to have at the top a connection frame where the admin can enter in their own information to start the connection. So like they can enter in their, I don't know, maybe their name or their port address that they want to run the server on. We won't have them enter in their IP address, I don't think, because we'll just use their local IP because they're the server, so we'll get the local IP from them. Once that's done, I'm going to have a history frame, maybe down here, where the admin can see a history of all of the chats. So like a window where we're showing all of the chats going on in real time. Then down here, we'll probably have a frame where we'll call it the client frame, where we can see all of the clients that are currently connected to the chat. We can see things like their name, maybe their IP address, that sort of stuff. Then we should probably have a message frame where the admin can type in a message to send to a client. And then down at the bottom, we'll have what we'll call the admin frame, where they can perform like admin duties, such as messaging an individual client, kicking a client, warning a client, maybe banning a client so that they can't connect back in if they've done something really bad. So I think we're going to have 5 different frames, and so let's make each of those frames right now. And if we're just going to stack them one on top of the other, we'll use the pack system for managing that. So let's head over to our all right, over here to our server script, and we'll start looking at the GUI layout. So we'll say create frames. So we're going to have a connection frame. Connection frame is going to be tkinter.frame, and we'll place it in the root window with a background color of black. Okay, awesome. Right below that, I think we wanted to look at our chat history. So we'll say history frame is equal to tkinter.frame in the root window with a background of black. You know, I could probably just copy this. I'm going to just copy that one line because we're going to put it over and over again. Next, we'll have the frame that's going to hold all of the current connected clients. So I'll call this client frame. All right, and next we'll have an opportunity for the admin to like message everybody on the server, so we'll call this message frame where they can type in a message and then hit send. And then lastly, they'll have a frame where we can do some admin duties like warning, banning, and kicking you know, an unruly client. So we'll call that the admin frame. And so now let's we'll put some we'll put these onto the window by using the pack method here. And we'll pack and we'll use some like vertical padding here and there. So let's see, connection frame.pack. I'll add some vertical padding of 5 on the top and bottom. History frame.pack. I've got vertical padding on the bottom of this, so I'm not going to put any padding here. I think it'll be okay. We'll do the client frame next.pack, and I'll do a padding, vertical padding of 5, and so that'll hit the top of this and the bottom of the client frame. So now when I put the message frame in .pack, I don't need any padding. And then the admin frame, I kind of want the message and the admin frame to sort of be butted up against one another, so I'm not going to put any padding, any vertical padding here. Okay, so we have all of our frames in. If we run this, looks exactly the same, which is exactly what we expect because we have no widgets inside of them. So we have to go make some widgets. So let's start here by building out our, we'll start with our connection frame, right? So we'll say, okay, we'll come down here and we'll say connection frame layout. So in our connection frame, what we're going to need to get from the admin is essentially a port address to run the server on. We don't have to ask them for their IP address because we're just going to use the local IP of whatever machine they're on. So that's pretty nice here. But we're also going to need a start button and an end button to essentially start and end the server. And if you think about it, we're going to want the end button to be initially disabled because we can't end a connection unless we already have one open. So in order to do that, we're going to bring in that keyword disabled from tkinter. So we'll say right here at the top of our code, we'll say from tkinter import disabled. Okay, perfect. So let's go down and build out these widgets in our connection frame. So I think just like before we saw, if you just have an empty an entry box, the user won't really know what they should enter in there. So I like to put some labels on these. So I'll say port label is equal to tkinter.label, a label object. We're going to put it in the connection frame. It'll have a text which will read port number. All right. The font will be my font, that custom font that we had previously created. And then let's set the background and foreground colors. So our background color will be black, and our foreground or text color will be light green. All right, so there's the label. So now let's create the entry for this. So we'll say port underscore entry is equal to tkinter.entry. We'll create an entry object. We'll add it to the connection frame. The text, we don't need any text here, it's an entry. But we will hardcode a width. Let's hardcode a width to 10. We'll give it a border width of 3, and then we'll set the font to be that custom my font that we had defined. Now we need our start and end buttons, so we'll do our start button first. Start button is equal to tkinter.button. We'll add it to the connection frame. We'll have the text say start server, We'll set a border width to 5, I think I did. Let's see. Yep, a border width of 5. We'll hard code the width of this button to be 15. We'll specify it. And then we'll set the font to be my custom font. And we'll set the background color to be light green here. So our buttons are going to be that light green color. All right, and then we need to disable the button to end the chat. So we'll say end button. End button, end the server, I should say. tkinter.button. And inside of here, we're going to add it to the connection frame. The text will read end server this time. I think that's pretty good. Border width, we'll style our buttons the same. So border width of 5, width of 15. The font will be my font, that custom font we created. We'll set the background color BG to be light green, but the state here is we're going to set the state so that this is disabled upon startup. So we'll say state is equal to disabled. All right, nice. So I think what we have to do now is we have to put them into we've created them. Now we just have to put them into this frame. So we're going to use the grid system, I think, to do this. So for our grid system, let's think about how we might want this. I kind of want, if we just run this right now. Oh, what do we got? An error? Error has no attribute button. Oh yeah, button. I spelled it wrong. Button, there we go. So if I run this right now, let's just think about how we want this layout to look. I think I want like the port options to be, right here, port label, and we'll say, port address, and then they can enter in their port, and then we'll just do start and end. So I'm going to do everything in one row, and we'll just separate them in separate columns. I think that will be good, and it'll utilize our space to the best of our, abilities. So I'll do port label dot grid. We'll put it in row 0, column 0, and we'll just put some light padding here. Pad X is 2. Pad Y is, let's do 10 vertical padding. That way it's not like butted right up against the top of our app, but it's spaced down quite nice. And I'm going to take this and paste it, and here we'll do, instead of port label, we'll do port entry, and we'll change our column to, column 1. Okie dokie. And then we'll paste these again. We might as well, because we got to do our start button and end button. So I'll put my start button next, start button, and then this will be my end button. And we all want them in the same row, but let's move them column-wise. So this will be column 2. This will be column 3. I'm going to put a little bit more horizontal padding around my buttons. We'll do like 5 and 5, I think. That should look good. So if we run this, what does that frame look like? There is our frame, and I think it looks pretty good. We got our port number where we can enter in our port 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we can start the server. The end server is currently blocked out. So our first frame, I think, looks great. So now let's work on our history frame. And so our history frame is where we're going to have a history of all of the chat correspondences that have occurred. So it's like the chat in real time. So if you think about it, we're definitely going to want a scroll bar and a list box that are linked together. So the list box will hold each individual chat item, and then the scroll bar is going to allow us to scroll through it. And so if you remember from our introductory videos on tkinter, when we make a scroll bar object and place it in the history frame, we have to set the orientation, whether we want it to be a vertical scroll bar or a horizontal scroll bar. And so we're going to want a vertical one. So I'm going to just come up to the top and import the word vertical, and that is going to allow us to do that. So now we'll make our list box, and we'll sync the list box and the scroll bar together so that they move in place. So let's come down here. We're going to do our history frame next. History frame layout right here. And so the first thing that we'll do is we'll create our scroll bar. So we'll call it history scroll bar. I'm not going to call it my scroll bar. I know I did that in the last video, but we're going to have multiple scroll bars. So we're going to have one for this history frame, but then we're also, I think we might also put one in for the client frame. So let's call this history scroll bar. We'll make it a tkinter.scroll bar object. Where are we placing it? We're going to place it in the history frame, and we'll orient it to be vertical. Awesome. Now let's go to the list box. So we'll make a list box now. History list box. This box is tkinter.scroll list box. We're going to place it in the history frame. We are going to set the height to 10. We'll set the hardcode the width to be 55. I'll set a border width here. I'll set a border width to be 3. Some other things, I'll set my font to be my custom font, my font. I'll set the background color to be black. I'll set the text color or foreground color to be light green. And then the last thing that I need to make sure I do is I link my scroll bar. So that's a two-step process if you remember. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to tell the list box on the Y scroll command to link it to our history scroll bar and dot set. So we're going to say dot set. All right. So this is kind of like when when you press a button, we have to have the command to link it to a specific function. Here, when we scroll on the list box, we're setting it to scroll the list bar and then call the set on the scroll bar. So now let's come over here to our scroll bar, and we have to configure our scroll bar. So we'll say history scroll bar dot config. And in here, what are we going to config? We're going to config, call the command. So when we click on the scroll bar and move it, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to call history list box dot Y view. We're going to change the vertical view of the list box. All right, and so that's that twofold process, which now links our list box and our scroll bar together. All right, so with that set, now let's place our list box and scroll bar into our frame. And if you think about it, what system do we want to use to manage the history frame? Well, we want our list box to appear, and then we want the scroll bar to be over here right on the right of it. So I think we're going to have to use the grid system in order to accomplish that again. So we'll say history listbox.grid. We'll simply place this in row 0, column 0. And then we'll do history scroll bar dot grid, and here we're going to do row 0, column 1, and that'll put it right to the right. And if you remember, when we do that, that scroll bar is going to be super duper tiny. So what we have to do is we have to expand it into the space in the given direction we want to expand it. And to do that, we use the sticky command when we're using the grid system, and we're going to expand it in the north-south direction. So if we run this now, we should hopefully have our two frames quite nicely built up here. And I think that looks really great. So this is going to hold all of the current chats that are happening, and we're going to be able to scroll through them in real time. I think this is a good place to stop here for this video. And our next video, what we'll do is we'll probably finish up this layout and work on our frames that are right down here. So I will see you in that next video. Hello and welcome back. Let's pick up right where we left off on our layout for our server side here, our admin. So this is what we currently have, right? We've got two of our frames done. Let's go down and do our client frame, which is going to be a list box of all of the clients currently connected in the chat. And again, we're going to want a scroll bar and a link box linked together. And I think this is going to be really similar to what we had done for our history frame. So what I might just do is come over here to my history frame. I'm going to just copy this, and we'll put a new comment here. We'll say client frame layout, and I'm going to paste this in right here. And let's just make sure we make the appropriate changes. So anywhere I have the word history, and I'm holding Alt here to do this. History. I'm going to delete history, and I'm going to write the word client. Alright, so that worked out really nicely. I think I've changed all of those things there. Let me just double check to make sure there's no other changes that we needed to make here. So we've got our client scroll bar. It's a scroll bar in the client frame. Its orientation is going to be vertical. We got our list box, which is in the client frame. It is going to be the same sizes, so that all looks great. Oh, if I come all the way over here, I missed one, right? I missed one history. I got to set the Y scroll command of this not to be the history scroll bar, but the client scroll bar. So make sure you change that one as well. Okay, so that's good. And then we've got the client scroll bar. We're configuring it to be on command whenever we click it. We're going to go change the vertical view of the list box, so that looks great. And then this all looks good. So if we run this, now we should see our client frame. And so that looks pretty slick, right? These two boxes that are right on top of one another. You can imagine our chat's going to be happening here, and here's going to be all of our clients that we can scroll through and select. All right, awesome. So now, what's next? Well, the next thing that we might have to do is work on our message frame. And our message frame is going to be where the admin can type in a message to be broadcast to the whole entire chat. So it'll appear in everybody's chat window. So what we'll need is we'll need an entry object where the admin can type in a message, and then we'll need a button to send the message. So we just need really, I think, just two things here in our what we're calling our message frame. So we'll say next we'll do our message frame layout. So in our message frame, I'm going to have an input entry, I'll call it tkinter.entry, and we'll put it in the message frame. And let's style it, hard code it with a width of 40, a border width of 3. And what else are we going to change here? We'll add the font. So we'll say font is equal to my font. All right, and then next we'll need a button. So we'll take a button and we'll call this button self broadcast button. So this is going to be our self broadcast button, allow the admin to broadcast to everybody in the chat. And this is going to equal a tkinter button class. And inside of here, we're going to place it in the message frame. We'll set the text to be, we'll just say broadcast, I think. That's probably good. Broadcast. We'll hard code a width here. I'm going to do a width of 13. It's going to be slightly smaller than our other buttons. Border width is going to equal 5. The font will be my font. And what are we're coloring our buttons to be light green, right? So I'll say background BG is light green. And then lastly, we don't want to have this button be active upon startup. We only want this button to be active when we make a connection and start our server. So we'll say state is equal to disabled. All right, so there is our button. So now let's put these widgets into the frame. So the system that we'll use here is we'll use the grid system again because I want them to be, I want the entry and then I want the button to the right of it. So we'll use the grid system. So we'll say input entry.grid. And we'll say row is 0, column is 0, and we'll put some padding on this. Pad X is 5, pad Y is 5. And then let's put our button. So self broadcast button dot grid. Row is going to be 0. The column is going to be 1. We want it to be the right of it, so column is equal to 1. Pad X is 5, pad Y is 5. All right, so let's take a look at what this frame looks like. All right, so there's our frame, so we can type in our message and then we can broadcast it. And then that leaves us this little bit of space right down here where we can work on our admin frame. And so here we want multiple buttons to run some admin functionality. So we're going to have a button where if the user types in a message, and they don't want it to broadcast to everybody, but they want to send it to a specific client, they should be able to click the client from this list and then send like a private message. So we'll have a private message button. We'll have a kick button so they can select a client from this list and then kick them out of the chat. And then we'll have a ban button so they can select a client here and then we'll ban that client based on the client's IP address. And so each one of these buttons are, again, going to be initially disabled because we don't want this to have any functionality until we actually start our server. So let's go ahead and make those buttons right now. All right, so we'll come down here. Okay, so we'll come down here and we will add our admin frame layout. Okay, give us our little space. We'll create a message button. So this will be like our private message, tkinter.button, and we'll add it to the admin frame. The text will simply say PM for private message. We'll set a border width to be 5. We'll hard code the width here to be 15. We'll set the font to be my font. The background will be light green, and then the state will be disabled. right, and again, when we're working with the layouts here of these GUIs, a lot of it is just trial and error. What looks good? So testing like the 15 here for the width and the border width of 5. It's a lot of just trial and error on my end. But I'm going to copy this right now, and I'm going to paste it 3 times. Okay, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I had something in my eye, and my eye was watering up, and I couldn't see my computer screen. It was getting pretty bad. But I think we're back, and we're good here. So I've copied this, so we got 3 buttons. I just need to change some of the parameters of these buttons. So I'm going to change the message button. We want a kick button, and this will say kick. All right, so we'll kick a client, and then we'll have a ban button, and this will say ban. And so, ban, and we'll ban a client. Okay, so now let's place these in, and I just want these buttons all in a row, 1, 2, 3, side by side. So we're going to use the grid system here. So we'll say message button dot grid, row is 0, column is 0. We'll do some horizontal padding of 5 and some vertical padding of 5. And it's gonna be a really similar formatting for the other buttons. So let's just copy it and paste it in. 1, 2, 3. And change the names accordingly. So kick button, and then ban button. Oh, not banned button, although that would be pretty cool if you could have a band just start playing when you hit that button. And then we got to change the column. So instead of column 0, I'm going to put this in column 1, and this will be in column 2. Okay, I think with that, our layout is complete. So let's take a look. All right, so if you look here, I think this layout looks awesome for our server side. So we can enter in our port number 12345. We'll start our server, and when we do that, all of these other things will be activated. We'll see chats happening up here. We'll get lists of clients as they connect, names and IP addresses. We'll be able to send a message to everybody on the chat with our broadcast. We should be able to select clients from our client list to personal message, kick them, or eventually ban them from our server. So I think this works really great. So let's just do a few more things here. In our last, iteration of our chat application, we were using a global variable for our socket. So we could access it inside of every single function and then make the appropriate changes to that socket. And we said that this could be less than ideal. And so in this more advanced version, we're going to get rid of the global variables altogether, and we're going to create a connection class. So we're going to use classes here in a very I think limited scope, but it's going to help us, I think, immensely in terms of organizing our code. So what we'll do here is let's just write the initialization method for the class, and we'll just pass. But later on, we'll create our connection object, and then we'll feed that to our different functions, and this should work really nicely. So above where I'm defining my functions, I'll just say create a connection class to hold our server socket. So we'll say class connection, and in here we'll say, okay, a class to store a connection, a server socket, and pertinent information. I think that's a pretty good docstring. I think I spelled pertinent wrong. Pertinent information, and we'll end the docstring. All right, and so now, if you're not too familiar with classes or object-oriented programming, the first thing that you have to do is you have to initialize the class, which will set the class's attributes anytime you make an instance of the class. And so in Python, to do that, we'll say def __ init __, and then we always have to pass in a parameter of self. And so that's just kind of the syntax here in Python to initialize a class, and then later on we'll actually write this initialization method, and we'll set some attributes for the connection object. All right, awesome. So this looks pretty good. So now why don't we go through and actually blueprint out some of the functions that we're going to need for our server. So we're just going to write the function signature for each function right now, and then we'll just pass, and later on we'll work on writing these functionalities. So let's think about what our server is going to have to do. So our server we're definitely gonna have to start the server. So we'll say def start server, and in here we're gonna pass in. If you think about it, when we start the server, it means we have to create a socket and use a socket. So we're going to pass in a connection, and the connection is going to be the thing that holds that server socket. So we'll say pass in a connection object, and we'll just say start the server on a given port number. All right, and we'll pass for right now. Perfect. If we're starting the server, we should be able to end the server. So we'll say end server, and again, we'll pass in a connection. And that, because it's the connection object that's going to hold our server socket. And we'll say begin the process of ending the server. So we're going to begin a process. So here we're not just going to. If you remember, I think in our last iteration of this, when we just severed the connection, right? We just severed a connection. We just ended it. Here we're going to have a little bit more of a back and forth where we say like, "Hello everyone." The server might say, "Hey everybody, we're quitting," and then all the clients might say, "Okay, we acknowledge you're quitting," and then everybody leaves. So right now though, we're just going to say pass. We're going to keep it simple. We need to be able to connect a client. So we'll say def connect client. All right, and this will pass in a connection object. And here we'll say connect an incoming client to the server. And we'll just pass. All right, just giving us an idea of the functionality that we need. Let's create a message. So we're gonna let's create messages that we can use to send to either like the whole chat server through a broadcast, or just through like a personal message. We got to be able to create a message. Now, if you remember, here we're creating a message. The message is not just going to be an individual string like it was in our previous iterations. It's going to be like what we'll call a message packet, which has lots of information in it. And so some of the information that the message packet is going to need, it's going to need a flag indicating what type of message it is, whether it's like a name flag or a primary message flag or an exit flag or a quit flag. It's going to need the name of whoever is sending the message, whether it's one of our clients or if it's our admin ourselves. It's going to need the actual message, so the string message, and then the color that we're going to use to represent the message. So we're going to pass all of that information in here. We do not need to pass in the connection though, because all we're going to do is just create a message. We're not really worried about sending it here through our socket. So in here we'll say return a message packet to be sent. So this is not only going to create the message packet, but it's also going to return it from this function. All right, then what we'll need something that is going to process our message. So when we get a message packet that comes in, let's process it. So like it will look to see what type of flag is present. So was it a name flag? Was it a quit flag? Was it a primary message flag? And based on those flags, it should do specific behavior. So we'll call this def process message. And so what are we going to need here? Well, we're going to need the socket so that we can receive the messages. So that's going to be our connection object. We're going to need to get in a message JSON. We'll call it message JSON, right? So it's going to be the string representation that is encoded, that has come in. We're going to need a client socket, a specific client that we're going to be running this process on. And we'll have lots of these probably going in threads. So for every client that connects, we'll run this function within an individual thread for that specific client. And then we're also going to need maybe the client's address. So client address. And for right now, we are going to set a default value here as a tuple, and we'll explain this later on. But for right now, I'm just going to set a default value as a tuple of 0, 0. And we'll explain this part later on, but it's good to just put that in here now for us. All right, and so this is going to be a big function for our server. So this is going to update server information based on a message packet flag. And right now we'll just pass. So this is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. It's going to get our message packets. It's going to filter through what type of message it is based on the flag, and then it's going to process it. And then let's see, what else do we got to do? Well, we should be able to broadcast our message. So we'll say def broadcast message. Here, if we're going to broadcast a message, we need our connection object, so we have access to our socket. And then we also need the message that we're going to broadcast, so I'll call it message JSON. And we'll say here, send a message to all client sockets connected to the server. And we'll say pass. Then we got to be able to receive a message. So we'll say def receive message. All right, so we got to get these, our connection object. We're going to need a connection. And then we will probably run this in a bunch of threads for every client that connects. So we need a client socket here. So what socket should we be receiving messages from? So we'll say receive an incoming message from a client. All right, and we'll say pass. Then let's think. So that's kind of like all of the server's functionality, but then let's get into some of the admin functionality. The admin should be able to, so this function right here, broadcast message, gets something from a client and then broadcasts it. But we want something that we can broadcast anytime the user hits, or the admin hits their own broadcast button. So if they type in a button and hit broadcast here, we also want to broadcast. So we'll call this self broadcast. And it'll take in a connection. All right, and we'll say broadcast a special admin message to all clients. All right, we'll pass here. What else does the admin need to do? Well, the admin has to send a private message, so we'll say def private message. It'll take in a connection object. And we'll say here we'll send a private message to a single client. All right, we'll pass. We need to be able to kick our clients, so we'll say def kick client. We'll take in a connection object. And we'll say kick a given client off the server. Get them out of here, right? We'll say get them out of here. And then lastly, we need to ban a client if they are extremely bad. We'll say def ban client, and we'll pass in our connection object. And we'll say here, ban a given client off, ban a given client based on their IP address. So we're going to ban them based off of their IP address. And we'll say pass here. Okay, so that is all of the functionality that I think is going to be needed for our server. So you can see quite a bit here, quite a bit more that we can do, and a lot of it is going to be centered around the fact that we have a connection object that we are going to create that's going to hold our socket, our server socket, and then we can just pass it into these functions and allow some work to be done on that socket. So that looks really great here. I'm going to save this. And let's see how we are doing on time. Oh, we're at about 19 minutes. So I will stop here, and in our next video, we'll just quickly rough out the functionality for the client on the other side. So I think this is a good place to stop, and I will see you in our next video.